Come on down toward the front, you all. It's so nice to see you all, and I am going to miss you all on Tuesday evenings. I know you'll miss me too, maybe. Next semester, if you are interested in taking Newton Changemaker series again, we will be having a different theme from the Art of the Pivot. We're going to be talking about the right story for the right audience. So whether people are looking for money, looking for customers, looking for team members, figuring out the right story for the right audience. We will have speakers from, what kind of companies? We'll have speakers from Microsoft, from, I should know more than I know at the moment, from a company called Kuyana, which is a fashion company. So it'll be an interesting semester as well. But as you're getting seated, toward the front, you all, toward the front, come on down. Come on closer to the front. Yes, back there, exactly, you all, come on down. As you all are getting seated, we will go ahead and get started. I don't want to lose any time because we have a pretty incredible lineup this evening. You can see behind me, we have two speakers who will be introduced momentarily. I want you all to do something that we normally don't do, but give a round of applause for the speaker who will be the student who's introducing them, because he has a challenge at hand. His challenge is to tell you all just enough to intrigue you. So we'll be aware of that as you start to do your introduction. Innocent, you'll be heading back. Are you heading back in December?
2 weeks.
And where are you heading to?
Ghana.
So you're always a bear, you know. So I hope you'll always stay in touch, and I will. So it's not that loud, Ian, if you're back there. If you can turn it up just a little bit, and I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Okay. The enthusiasm is there. So today we're going to have a special way that we're going to show our excitement, because this is the very last lecture session for this particular Newton series. So if I say Ago, I need you to say Ame. Ago.
Amen.
Ago.
Amen.
Okay. So they say iron sharpens iron, and today we have two phenomenal people. The first person that we have is our host. She is a world-renowned educator and author. She is a leading force in managerial adaptability and leadership. She's written 2 hallmark books, one of them called Super Flexibility for Knowledge Enterprises, and another one of them called Managerial Psychology, How to Create the Behavior You Need in Organizations. As a senior lecturer and distinguished teaching fellow at the Haas Business School, she has shaped the minds of countless leaders and innovators, and today she sits on the board of multiple technology companies. Right now, she's leading the research in how digital technology impacts the future of work. Who else to welcome our speaker and be the host than our very own Dr. Homa Bahrami.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now for our speaker, he asked me to keep it short because he likes to keep it short and deep. But born and raised in Hyderabad, India, he had a happy childhood and he wanted to be a journalist when he grew up. In fact, he was once elected as the editor for the day for the Economic Times, and he still holds a piece of the paper that he edited in his office. For college, he was asked to choose between engineering and medicine, but because he had the fear of blood, he decided to choose to do electronics and communications engineering at Osmania University, before traveling to the US to Green State University, and then finally capping it off with an MBA here at our very own Haas Business School. He began his odyssey in the Valley, joining Measure X before taking a bite at Apple and then jumping on to Silicon Graphics. And then after that, he decided, why not start my own startup? So he started Pictera, a company that was way ahead of its time. It was a photo sharing app, the Instagram of the day. And a few years later, in 1998, as he hoped to sell off that particular company to Adobe, he did not manage to sell the product, but managed to sell himself. And so that is how he found himself at Adobe. And since then, he has taken Adobe through heights, transforming it from a single sale technology company to a cloud-based subscription juggernaut, growing by 10 times from 24 billion to 230 billion. I could say more and more about this speaker, but he leads Adobe right now at the forefront of AI innovation with projects like Amazon Firefly and Amazon Sensei and Adobe Sensei. Without further ado, let us give it all up for Shantanu Narayen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. It's great to be back at Berkeley, Haas as well. Go Bears, right?
Well, and I had the pleasure, believe it or not, of being one of Shantanu's professors way back when.
I do remember that.
And he was working at the time while coming to school in our evening weekend program, which was quite an achievement. We really want to make this more of a conversation. So please bring up your questions. I'm going to kick off by asking Shantanu around 3 themes. Theme 1 is about his own personal journey, which I'm sure many of you would be interested in. Theme 2 is about reinvention of Adobe. Adobe is 42 years old, founded, I think, in 1982, if my memory serves me well. And as you know, many companies in the Valley have a short half-life. But Adobe has been reinvented again and again and again. And for the past 20 years, Shantanu's been at the helm. So we would love to hear your thoughts on, reinvention, because the theme of the series is the art of the pivot. And of course, you've done that so many times. And then we're going to wrap up by taking a look at the future, AI, where are we going as a society, and what might be exciting career opportunities at store. So please don't hesitate, raise your hand. We're not going to wait till the end to ask the questions. Let's ask your questions as you think about them. Just raise your hand, and Vicky and others will come with a microphone, and we can hear you. So let's just get started, Shantanu, with your journey. I think Innocent gave us a very comprehensive
He was. His memory's pretty amazing.
overview. That was very impressive, Innocent. But just take us through the key inflection point in your journey, the moments that you say, aha, those were really instrumental in my evolution, not just as a human being, as a student, but as a leader as you moved on.
Well, as Homa knows, I hate to talk about myself, but I grew up, as you said, in India, and I was very fortunate. I went to a great school. A lot has been written about my high school, because I went to this school that was modeled after the British public school in India, and it was called the Hyderabad Public School, and I think an all-round education, which is something you all take for granted here, in the U.S. and at Berkeley. But I would say that was really instrumental, and they taught you leadership. You had to participate in extracurricular activities, and that fascinated me. I was the editor of the school magazine. I was captain of the debate team. The others who went to the same high school, we always talk about this, is Satya Nadella, who is CEO of Microsoft, Ajay Banga, who's now president of the World Bank. And we were all at the same school at the same time, same high school at the same time. And then, again, as he said, the sort of thing was, what do I study? And I wanted to be a journalist, but my parents, my father had been an engineer, my brother's an engineer, and so I'm like, okay, I'll study engineering. I hated it. I did electronics and communication engineering, but I fell in love with computers. The last semester in the last year, microprocessors and computer science, and so then I came here to pursue a master's in computer science. It also happened that in those days, in the early 80s, when you came to the US, it was much harder to get a scholarship for MBA. I was always fascinated with the business of technology. My father ran his own business, so I came here to study computer science. I actually applied to a whole bunch of schools. I got admission everywhere I applied, but I got aid in only one small school in Ohio, Bowling Green State University, and best decision I made in my life, because I met my wife on the first day of school there. And so the pursuit of education for all of you is a really good thing. And then I came to the Valley in '86, and I've worked for these amazing companies. I worked for Apple, I worked for Silicon Graphics. I started my own company, Pictra. We did silicon, MeasureX automation systems, and then from '98 I've been at Adobe. So that's my story.
You know, but I think the theme is the pivot. You know, if I just look at that sort of 15-year journey you went through, you just described, you've had several pivots, right? Finished your education in India, came over here, did a master's degree, went to MeasureX, I remember MeasureX, automation company of some sort. Then you went to Apple during its sort of teenage years, right? Mike Spindler, I think, was the CEO, or was it Scully?
Scully and then Spindler, exactly.
Right, so those were the early days. And then Silicon Graphics, I remember Ed McCracken, and that was
Tom Jermolak, and you know, for those, I mean, Silicon Graphics in those days was the company to be at, because Jurassic Park had just come out, and you know, they had the opportunity to perhaps become what NVIDIA is today, right? I mean, when you're talking about the art of the pivot, they were all about graphics and graphics, but you know, the bigger opportunity was graphic chips. Sorry, I interrupted, but yes.
No, and I was just going to ask you, how do you manage transition? Because for our colleagues here in the room, you know, they're going to have multiple careers during the span of their working lives. And as you went through these different transitions, you know, what were the ups and the downs? What were the challenges and what were the excitements? The dark clouds and the silver linings of adjusting to a new life in the US, different culture, different companies, your own startup versus a bigger company. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I think in many ways, for me, growing up in India was, you know, fantastic, because in India, I mean, you know, there's a Hindi word called jugaad, and which is all about, you know, sort of translated, maybe it's being about how can you be resourceful and how do you deal with ambiguity and uncertainty. You know, we all take all these tests over time, right? I mean, you do the Myers-Briggs test, or you do your Strength Finder test, and they find that actually one of the things that I'm you know, very comfortable with, its ambiguity and uncertainty. And you know, I think when you talk about pivots, in many ways, you know, pivots is about having a, you know, taking a leap of faith, right? And entrepreneurship is also about taking a leap of faith, because there are more unknowns than knowns at that time. And so maybe, you know, I'm just fortunate that some of it comes easy. And the Valley is it's this incredible place, because the Valley, dealing with failure and dealing with ambiguity, it's considered a badge of honor working for a company that may not have succeeded, rather than something that's held against you. And you know, a lot of you will grow up sort of taking it for granted, but it's what I think makes this Valley and makes, you know, the US such a special place. So, you know, there's some of it that was luck, there was some of it that, you know, you come as a startup, you come as a student, and you're like, oh my God, I got to get my green card, and therefore, you know, you study and you work hard and you do. True story, I was not very academically inclined at undergrad. I mean, I did all kinds of other things. I sailed competitively for the country. I sailed for India, you know, I participated in tennis. And my brother, I have one older brother, and he went to, you know, he was the more traditional academic route. He went to IIT Madras, which is, you know, the premier engineering institute. He got his master's at UT Austin. He had, you know, great stuff. And so when I came, he told me, if you get a B in grad school, you get deported. And I didn't know any better. So I'm like, okay, you know, maybe I really have to study after all. So, you know, I buckled down, and in computer science, I'm like, okay, let me, you know, see if I can do it for myself. But it just sort of, these things happen. And, you know, I think if you have the right attitude, you just sort of, attitude is so much about it, right? I mean, which is like, you're not going to win every battle. And I think that's really helped serve me well as well.
You know, and I think this is a really important learning moment based on what you said, the mindset, the attitude. And I've, of course, had the pleasure of seeing you inside Adobe and see you as a CEO inside and see you interact with your different colleagues. And I think one of the things that makes you comfortable with ambiguity, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's your attitude. You're curious. You're always curious. You always have questions. And the other thing that I think makes it interesting, so you have a learner's mindset, you have a student's mindset. And I think that's actually incredibly important as our colleagues here chart their careers in the future. Is this change an opportunity for me to learn, to grow, to dig into something I don't know anything about, or is it the end of life because I won't get an A? So I think that's a very, very important moment. And I see that in my other successful students in this world.
No, I think that's astute. And, I was fortunate. My mother's a professor of English. And so she inculcated in me this sort of desire to learn.
Yeah.
My father is still the most voracious reader I know. He's 94 and he's constantly reading. And so you're right. I mean, I think they blessed me with this sort of sense of wanting to learn. And, again, this valley is such an amazing place because there's always something, happening all the time. And so you have these scary smart people at the company. And, as I'm learning about AI and stuff like that and diffusion models or transformer models, I'm not the expert, but you have the ability, you have the resources. The question is, are you taking advantage of it, right?
Well, and somebody called the Valley the Olympics of innovation, which I think to your point about so many smart people, great ideas. So you mentioned failure. How does that come into it? Because, as you say, innovation is about trial and error. And I'm just curious about your own failure, if I may call it like that. Could you share something with us?
I don't think we have enough time to talk about all my failures, but
pick one of your favorites.
Well, I say this, which is, part of it is the attitude that you take, right, into that. I mean, you're always learning. My startup, the startup that I worked on, Pictra, by any means, it was not commercially successful. So you can call that a failure, right? From one aspect it is. I don't think of it that way. I mean, I think of it as, I learned what it takes to, incubate a company, to raise money, to build a team. We had some pretty interesting deals with Fuji and Kodak, that you had to go hustle and create. And you come up with this, how can you as a small company compete with, in those days, the behemoths were, Kodak and Fuji, as I mentioned. And so from one lens, the company failed, and you can call it a failure. From another lens, I learned more in that 18 months than I would in 5-10 years. And I landed up at Adobe because Adobe was interested in Pictra. The company didn't buy it, but things worked out, Homa. So, was it a failure or was it the best thing that happened to me, right? And so I think if you look at it that way, I mean, and products, right? I mean, when you're building products for a company and innovation, I mean, if you try and build products that are all so close to the tree, you're not trying hard enough. And so I think that's the way you have to look at it. But in an organization and for you individually, you have to say, what did I really learn from it? And if you take that attitude into it, you don't look at it. But the valley is different also, and I really mean this in a good way. In the valley, everybody talks about a company that they may have worked at that was not commercially successful as a badge of honor. In other parts of the world, it's not like that, right? I mean, there's risk aversion, or there's aversion associated with doing things. And so I think we're very fortunate in this place that, it's deemed as a mindset and the stepping stone to, bigger and better things.
Yeah, and I think that, I call it, are you a sponge or are you porcelain? If you look at life through the lens of a sponge, you're constantly absorbing, learning, adapting. Yeah. Porcelain is sort of my way or the highway.
Right.
And I think that is something that I've seen as well, which is huge differentiator for the Valley. And for many of our colleagues here, you want to become entrepreneurs and innovators. So I think this is an important lesson, is to view it as a learning experience rather than the way a lot of the media portrays it, which is success or failure, which I think is the wrong way to look at it.
I agree.
Let's bring ourselves to Adobe now. You joined Adobe after Pictra in '98 as the sort of product czar. Tell us about what it was like, your entry point after doing a startup, going to a much bigger company.
Well, first, I think, for a lot of the folks in the room, if you're not aware, I mean, Adobe was started by these two incredible inventors, John Warnock and Chuck Geschke. And they had an idea for being able to print. This was, just about the time when personal computers were coming, and a lot of you might say, well, we don't print that much anymore, but they came up with this idea to what became desktop publishing.
Yes.
And it was the combination of Apple, which was coming out with the Mac, Canon, which was coming out with the laser writer, and Adobe that created desktop publishing.
Yeah.
They created the first application where what you see on a screen is what you get, the WYSIWYG. Again, we use these terms and we date ourselves sometimes because people don't fully appreciate that. And they created this culture where they were all about how can you innovate and how can you have impact. And so I say that because the DNA of the company, the first business model of Adobe was to create a hardware company where they won't just create the software, they would create hardware that would allow them to actually sell hardware or controllers for printing. Actually, even taking a step back, they went, both of them, John and Chuck, went to their bosses at Xerox and said, hey, we have this idea for this company, and we think that we want to democratize access to publishing, and we think people will want to publish, and we want to build this product. And the company said, no, we don't think this idea is worth anything. And great, go off, spin it off. They didn't even take a share of the company. For those of you who don't know, Xerox PARC in those days had probably the best talent in the world aggregated. The mouse was invented there. Ethernet, which allows us to network, was invented there. The first user experience. And they didn't commercialize any of that. So John and Chuck really had this perspective that if you ever become a company where you don't appreciate the fact that disruption is happening and the fact that, as I put it, every business starts at a $0 billion business. You're not being, paranoid enough about what might happen. And so when I joined the company as well, I joined in '98, and the company had already made a couple of very successful transitions. They went from being a company that created PostScript. When you created PostScript, you had 4 customers. You had HP, you had Xerox, you had maybe Fuji, printer manufacturers, right? Canon. But when they came up with this idea to create a application company, you had to build a completely new ecosystem, right? You had to build a channel, you had to build a route to market, you had to create it. But that never fazed them. They said if the idea is enough and customers will, like it, let's go build what's required. Many years later, when we moved the business to the cloud, when people were like, no software company had ever transitioned from a desktop software company to a cloud. But the DNA of the company allowed us to think about, if it's a good idea, it's worth trying, right? What's the worst thing that'll happen? It'll fail. And so when I joined in '98, I came in as a particular role, and then in August of '98, the company actually hit a wall. The company hit a wall, the revenue plummeted. About 20% of the company was let go. And I was really literally thinking at that point that I'd be one of those who gets let go. I was a new kid, right? I just joined the company 6 months ago. And but the company got completely reorganized, and I'd come in as a general manager, and they said, no, we don't want you as a general manager. We're going to completely move functional, and will you become an engineering manager for a line of business? Which is, again, a lesson. You talk about the art of pivot, right? If this is the lesson, I was like, okay, that's what the company needs at that point. And I can either say, nope, I joined to do something, and you're changing it, and I'm out of here. Or I could say, well, that's what the company needs. Is this something that's exciting? It was a product called InDesign, and we were taking on Quark, which was the incumbent at that point. And I'm like, great. This is a nice competitive environment. We're trying to transform a company, and we're building a revolutionary new product, and they want me to do it. So let me do it. It's not what I came up to do, but let me do it. I'm open to it. And then I tell this story, which is 6 months later. My boss at that point came to me and said, hey, we had 4 engineering guys and 4 marketing guys. And he's like, I don't understand this engineering stuff, and I'd like to consolidate it and have somebody run all engineering. And I thought he was coming to tell me that, hey, you're going to report to somebody else. Because again, the other 3 engineering managers had probably 75 years of experience combined within Adobe. They were way more senior. They ran all the important businesses. And I said, okay. And he said, I'd like you to run all engineering. I said, let me think about it. Yes. Which was, again, I'm going to pivot and I'm going to do whatever is taken. And, luckily he gave me all those opportunities. Then I ran products. And so it's been this amazing journey. But I think hopefully what they would say, what characterized it was I took initiative. I was always curious. I always wanted to do. And I did what was important for the company first, rather than what I thought was important for me. I mean, I also tell the story that, as you pointed out, I did my MBA when I was working at Apple. And then the traditional wisdom at that point was, hey, you've done an MBA, so now you need to go into product management. Yes. Or you need to, go down a different track if you want to grow your career. I'm like, screw this. I like engineering. I'm going to stick with engineering, right? And again, it worked out. So But you also have to have a lot of luck, and I don't want to diminish in any way. I was at the right company. I believed in the company's mission. I liked the values of the company, and I'm sure we'll come to that in terms of career choices.
Yeah, and I was just going to focus in on the values, Shantanu, because there are a lot of great companies with great products, performance.
Yep.
But it's not for everybody.
Yep.
I just had 2 of my students interview with a major tech company, and one of them loved the conversation, really enjoyed it, is probably going to work there. It's a very well-known company. And the other one walked out and said, no, this is not for me.
Yep.
And so tell us about this sort of values component, because Adobe is a very strong values-based company. And how did that align with you as you kind of took on these different assignments and roles?
Well, first you're right, and it's hard early in your career to understand how important values really are. But I would say that people do their best work when they resonate with the vision of the company. What does the company stand for? We talk about changing the world through personalized digital experiences. And it's our job as management translating what that means so that every employee says, okay, this is how what I'm doing is contributing to the mission of the company. And then we talk about our values. We talk about create the future, or we talk about be genuine, or we talk about owning the outcome or raising the bar. And those words have to mean something. And we have to live by those values. But to your point, there are different companies in the valley, and they have different values. But people do their best work when they can feel themselves. John and Chuck started the company, and they said, we just want to build a company where good people want to work. And we've tried to expand that as we've grown from 1,000 people to 30,000 people in a global company, to say, when people come there, can they be themselves? And if that works with them, and there are other companies with different cultures and different values.
And other people gravitate towards them. So
people ask me this question a different way, which is like, hey, how do you recruit people when people can go to a really small company, a startup, and it may have a different risk-reward profile, or they go to the largest company in the world, and that has a different brand and a profile. And I'm like, all you can do is you can describe who you are. And through internship programs, let's do a self-selection, right? If you really want to go to a small startup, and that's what, go there. And so I think being genuine about who you are and being clear about who you are, self-selects the kind of people who want to be at your company. And it's okay if not everybody wants to be there.
But I think this is another very important learning moment, which is self-awareness. Who am I? What am I interested in? What makes me tick? What is my sense of right and wrong? What do I gravitate towards? What do I not gravitate towards? I think it's so important, because skills is something we can put names and numbers around, but values is a little bit more intangible. But I think it's much more important, because if you join a company whose values are not in sync with yours, then you're not going to be able to sustain it. So I just found that interesting for you.
Yeah, which is why I think internships, we do a lot of college internships. It's a try before you buy both ways, right? And sometimes, you meet with these interns who worked at the company, and I tell them, honestly, I say, if you really loved it, great. And if we really loved having you here, let's, make that
it's a match.
Permanent. It's a match. If you hated it, don't dismiss the fact that you learn something valuable about what you like to do and what you don't like to do. And if that happens early in your career, even that is a gift, right? Because you're going then to a place where you may actually find the way you want to make a difference matches what you want to do. And everybody has different career aspirations. Not everybody wants to be CEO. Not everybody, you know, some want to be engineers. And so we have the fellow track, which is like, you know, we need that. So I think being aware, to your point, very correct about only you know what's right for you and your careers. And you have to trust your judgment more than somebody else telling you, you know, what to do.
And what makes sense for you does not make sense for others, because this is one of the things that I don't like in the general media, which is one size fits all. You know, this is the hallmark of success. If you made $1 zillion, that's, you know, success. Whereas I think it's so individual, and it's so based on who the individual is and what makes them tick. Let's go back to Adobe and the theme of pivots. Adobe's been reinvented multiple times. I mean, I remember when you did the Macromedia acquisition back in 2005. Then you did the Omniture one in 2009, which took you to the digital experience. You went into the cloud, the subscription model. Take us through the important pivotal moments of Adobe's reinvention. And then the second question I have is, what does it take as a CEO to lead such a transformative pivot? Because these things were not incremental little tweaks. Just curious about you.
Two things. I mean, two thoughts come to mind. I mean, the first thought is, as you're thinking about what a company's opportunity is, you have to do, and we've talked about this before, you have to do flag planting, right? You have to say, what is the vision of the company? Each of you, in whatever role you take on, you know, if you're managing people, you have three parts, I would say, to the roles that you have. You have the part of creating a shared, whether it's a vision, a goal, whatever you want to call it, right? You have to have a cadence of execution. You have to be able to execute. You know, strategy without execution, I think, is hallucination, right? And you have to be able to have the right team and the people that allow you to do that. And so, as we think about, you know, first those seminal moments, as we like to call it at Adobe, I mean, a lot of that does come from the flag planting and what do we want to be, right? The Macromedia acquisition was, at that point, some really hard work that we did, which we said, hey, we have Photoshop, which does image editing. We have Illustrator that does vector. But we don't have something that does animation at that point. We don't have something as video. And so you can position the company as individual products, or you can position the company as, we want to be able to do anything that a graphics professional or a graphics creator wants to do, you know, across any media type or any device. If you think about it that way, first you're changing the aperture by which you think of your company, right? And if that lens is expanded, then you say, okay, can you build that yourself, or do you have to go, you know, acquire somebody or merge with somebody to fulfill that vision? But it starts with that strategic envisioning exercise. Omniture was very much the same. You know, in 2009, we said, why is it that we are the content creation company, but we don't think about content management or content delivery or content monetization or content measurement? You know, I mean, and a lot of these come from experiences. You know, we used to go visit the major publishers in the world, and they would be like, yeah, we'd love to talk to Adobe because everybody uses Adobe products, but we don't know why they're mission critical for us. And so you look at it and say, why are we limiting our aspirations? So I would say all of the, same thing with the cloud. The cloud, we were like, you know, we deliver products every 12 or 18 months. Innovation doesn't wait for 12 or 18 month cycles. You know, why can't we free our product people from being able to innovate at any given time? You know, and mobile was coming and the cloud was coming. And so, you know, I think with all pivots, there's both the envisioning and there's frankly data points that exist that should, you know, support that. So that's the first part, you know, of transformational work, which is like, are you thinking aspirationally enough? Are you looking at outside-in things, because you can't only be an inside-out company, right? And are you looking at the data points? And so you first say, okay, then what does that mean and how do you create it? And once you do that, then I think transformation is about saying, do you have a long enough horizon and do you have the right team? Then it's all about, what does Sandhill, I trust most of you have heard of Sandhill Road in Menlo Park. It's the center of all, venture capital activity. What do Sandhill venture capitalists do? They invest in people. At the end of the day, most of the companies that are formed, they pivot in the terms of the ideas, but they're saying, I trust something. So when you're trying to transform, you're like, okay, do you have an idea of what you want to do? Then you find the right people and you sponsor and empower and remove obstacles in the way, because antibodies come out from everywhere in a company when you're trying something new. It's amazing how much companies are geared towards where is the current power in the company, and the current power tends to be with the incumbency who are driving revenue today, and left to themselves, they would be like, why do you want to invest in anything new? Just keep investing in the same. But software has an S-curve. So I think those are a couple of the lessons, and you have to just be comfortable with the ambiguity again that goes with, yeah, we're going to try it, we're going to sponsor it, we're going to keep this person in charge of it, and if it doesn't work, then great. It's not it doesn't work because of them. You have to take responsibility as a leader. You ask them to do it, great. So celebrate what they were able to accomplish, and then your job to find them something else to do that's exciting.
But I think, again, you said something that I think is a very important lesson for all of us in this room interested in entrepreneurial, innovation-driven careers, which is, you said you've got to look at it outside in, not inside out. When we look at many companies that failed to commercialize, Xerox, you mentioned Xerox, Kodak, Blockbuster, I don't know, many of you are too young to remember Blockbuster. They basically looked at their opportunities inside out, not outside in. Why did Xerox say no to Chuck Geschke and John Warnock? Because they said, what are we going to do with this thing?
I'm glad they said no.
Well, that was a good thing. But the point is they were looking at it through the lens of the incumbency.
Right.
We make copiers. What's this got to do with us? So I think outside in is really important. And then you mentioned, you put yourself in the customer's shoes. You said we talk to customers, and they said you do content generation, but not content management, not content measurement. So that gave you the idea that, hey, perhaps there's an opportunity for us here. So I think that's a very important lesson, because I've looked at many, many companies that haven't reinvented themselves, and I think that's one of the big differences. Inside out rather than outside in.
And putting yourself, you mentioned this, which is, if somebody comes to me at Adobe and says, we want to start a project or we want to start a company, I'm like, okay, tell me what you're building. And the ones that typically get funded is where they say, I have this problem and I'd like to build a product for myself. I find a lot of, because they have a real vision of what they want to do. If they say, well, I did a survey and, I think that, that, again, and different people have different experiences. What appeals to me is people saying, the person who built Photoshop built this product called Lightroom, and he came to me once and Mark Hamburg said, hey, I worked on Photoshop, I think it's incredible, but I'm now a professional photographer and I want a product that's fully purposed towards that. And I'm like, wow. This guy is working on the most successful product in the company, and he says he wants to do something. So he really believes in that. It's my job to then, allow him to explore that, right? Because otherwise he's going to go away and do it somewhere else.
So we've talked a lot about the positive, fun side of pivots and transformations, but there's some challenging parts too. You mentioned antibodies. You mentioned incumbents. There's transition time before you realize the vision and see it. So tell us about how you deal with the challenges. You mentioned in '98, for example, Adobe had a tough time. I remember Adobe having a tough time post-financial crisis. Take us through your thought process as you deal with the challenging moments and not
a couple of thoughts come to mind, and just to maybe punctuate some of the challenges, as you said, when we moved to the cloud, we had to go and tell Wall Street that we were going to be reducing our earnings per share by 65%, right? We were going to be reducing our revenue by 20 because instead of recognizing all the revenue up front, we were going to recognize that ratably. But we thought we were going to, attract a whole bunch of new customers. Or, in every pivot, there's an implication, right? I mean, when we moved to the cloud, there were a lot of customers who were like, I like my box. I like the software delivered to me every 18 months. And so, I think with every innovative idea, there are people who don't want to change the status quo, and there's inertia associated with the business. So, I mean, I think the lessons that I've learned on that front is you have to listen to the people who are opposed to a new idea to learn from it, correct? Because a lot of the reasons that they might bring for why they don't like it may be completely valid. But once you make a decision, it's also not a democracy. You have to then say, you're on the boat or you're off the boat. And judgment is applying when are you in the first part of because if your judgment is bad and you're not listening to what could go wrong, then you're not addressing it. But at some point when you made a decision, if there are people who are like, I don't like it, you're like, great, thank you for your contributions. Yeah. And so, I think in all these pivots, transparency is important. Transparency with the street, transparency with your employees, transparency with customers, and that genuine conversation. But once you make a decision, you also have to say,
But it's a pretty big deal to say to Wall Street, which is pretty fickle and short-term oriented, 65% decline in our revenue. How was that conversation?
Well, I always say, Homa, luckily it worked out, which is why you're asking me the question. Otherwise somebody else would be saying what a stupid idea that was. With investors as well, and I think this is an important thing, you get the investors you want. If people perceived any company as a value stock, which is not going to grow a lot but was profitable, there's a certain set of investors that are attracted to that. If you're saying, I want to be a growth-oriented company and this is what I'm going to do, right? I mean, the one that's done that masterfully better than any other company, I think, in the history of business is Amazon, right? Where Jeff was very, very clear, very on about this is the kind of company that I'm going to build. And so you're trying to get an investor who's not interested in the profile that you want to be investing as you is foolhardy. And so, I think that's how you do it, which is like you've decided something. If you're transparent, then there'll be self-selection, whether it's self-selection on employees, self-selection on customers, self-selection on investors. So that's the way I tend to think about it.
But I think there's another lesson here, Shantanu.
And you take a long-term enough perspective.
But you said transparency, and I think transparency means being super honest and not sugar-coated. Which is, hey, this is what it is. And, I think that generates trust. I don't know what you think, but in my
I agree. I agree. In 2011, when we had that Wall Street, conference where we announced we were moving to the cloud, that was not the amount of preparation that goes into it. And everybody also now talks about, wow, it's successful, it must have been easy, and, I think they're all saying, hey, how did you move to the cloud? And maybe they're hoping I'd say, well, I was driving down 280 and I saw the cloud. I mean, that is so far from the truth, right? I mean, the truth is you have thousands of people working hard, trying things out. We ran experiments in Australia. We modeled this many, many, many ways. And, it's like in sports, right? They always say, if you're not practicing, somebody else is. And we did that. And so all of that went into this sort of announcement, but that was a seminal moment, and you take those very seriously, and they're tough.
I talk about toughness, and I have another sort of slightly personal question. And by the way, please raise your hands and ask questions. We want to hear from you. I don't want to. Anybody has a burning question? Because I was going to ask you, just to wrap up this transformation conversation, how do you recharge your batteries? Because being a CEO up there with that huge responsibility, all the people, the investors, the customers, the weight on your shoulders,
I love what I do. When I got my job, John Warnock said something very profound to me. He said, Shantanu, if you don't like your job, you have one person to blame.
You.
Yeah. He certainly didn't mean himself. And so I think that's an important thing also. I mean, there's way too much of people thinking I'm a victim, and and that's the part that I have the best job. I mean, I run the company. I can do, I can focus on what I want. And I love building products. I love building products. I love seeing the impact of the products. When you have 1 billion people who've used your products and, people tell you the good and the bad, I mean, that's motivating for me and inspiring, and I like it.
So do you
and I like working with people.
And do you still sail? I'm just curious.
No.
But you're a cricket fan as well.
I'm a huge cricket fan.
So
if you grew up in India, cricket is a religion more than any religion is a religion, so yes.
So
I've invested I'm a part owner of the San Francisco Unicorns. We're trying to bring Major League Cricket to the US. So
it'll be interesting to see how that works. Well, soccer's had a little bit of a...
Well, soccer at least has a farm system. I think the challenge for cricket will be a little bit more of, if you don't have a farm system, how do you get that younger generation? But, there still are 2 or 3 billion people who are pretty passionate. It is an interesting experiment.
Exactly.
I think there was one there.
So we have a question there,
Yeah.
please. Yeah, just a brief introduction would be great.
Sure. Hi, my name is Nicholas. I am an international student from Germany, and I'm studying math here in Berkeley right now. My question is not directly related to the art of pivot. It's more of a it's a burning question that I have in my head right now. I just looked up your Wikipedia, and one thing that came up is the compensation that you're paid at Adobe, and the ratio of the compensation to the average ratio. And the burning question that I have is how do you sort of argue that a CEO, for example, like you, is deserves that compensation, where the compensation I think is 100 times or so higher than the average compensation in the company, which is quite a bit, or it's 229 apparently. Yeah, thank you.
I think it's one of those realities of business right now that we pay everybody really well. And if you believe in a pay for performance, hopefully I earn that performance, otherwise I wouldn't be in that role. I think if you're trying to, let's take a step back. If you're starting a company and you're going to try and attract people for certain roles, do you want to pay competitively where the market is or not? And so that's a question that you're all going to have to face. And again, that could be your value system, right? The value system of, are we paying what market rates are for certain roles? And so it gets asked more of CEOs than it gets asked of sports people, which is interesting. Maybe that's just the reality of where it is. But that's the way we look at it. Do I feel well compensated? The answer is absolutely yes. And do some people look at that and say that's unfair? Probably, right? But I have to earn that.
But we also have to say that there is a compensation committee of the board of directors.
Yes.
This is not something you decide for yourself. There is a process that they go through in order to decide on compensation, looking at the peer companies, what is the going rate for the job, what will it take to retain, and there's different components to compensation. Retention, performance, short-term results, longer-term results. So it's a little bit of an algorithm that goes into it. So I just wanted to explain that. It's not just you saying
in fact, I have no say. Exactly.
I want this compensation. Please, we had another hand up.
Hi, David Muller. I'm studying data science and economics. I really liked your little thing about how if cloud had failed, somebody else would be up here, talking about that. I guess my question would be, how do you feel about failure in your position? Not only your failure, but also as somebody who has to work with so many other people, the failure of people around you and how you think that impacts your job, your career, as well as the people like Adobe and how you think you're moving forward in the world. And do you think there's a difference between good failure and bad failure, or is all failure one of those two?
The one thing I talk to people about is sports. again, as I said, I'm a big sports fan. I watch all sports. When a quarterback throws an interception, or when somebody goes into the Hall of Fame in baseball, do you have any idea of what their batting average is when they go to the Hall of Fame?
Probably pretty good.
It's 300, which means one way of looking at it is the best baseball players in the world fail 7 times out of 10. It's another way of looking at it. So the way I look at it is, I want more at-bats. I want more opportunities. Some of them will be singles, some of them will be doubles, some of them will be home runs. I don't want to make the same failure multiple times. That would not be a good thing. But if I'm not willing to go up there to take a strike, if I'm not willing to put myself out to fail, there's no way I'm ever going to succeed either. And if you take that attitude of, what is our role as leaders of the company? Our role as leaders is giving people opportunity to try things. Our role is also learning and not making the same mistake twice. And our role is, when something is not successful, do you make that decision on not to pursue it in time? But I will tell you, for any one of you who's thinking of an entrepreneurial career, if you're worried about failing before you start, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to succeed either. So that's the way I look at it.
And actually, just to piggyback on your point, if you think of scientific endeavors, right, the progress of science, how has that evolved? What characterizes scientific progress? Trial and error, a lot of errors, right? Many of you are scientists in this room. So Thomas Edison had 1,000 experiments before he came up with the light bulb. So if you think about it, that has been part of how science has evolved. And I think in business, we're just sort of coming up with that through our entrepreneurial kind of activity, and particularly in Silicon Valley. But it's something that we're familiar with in other endeavors. It's just that we haven't, I don't think, embraced it the same way in the business world. Innovation without failure, I don't think exists. So,
Christina Susak with the College of Engineering Sutardja Center, Executive Education. To that point, I recently saw a quote from an executive where he said, when it comes to winning and losing, I never lose. I win or I learn.
Yeah.
And I really like that reframe.
yeah. I think that's a great way of putting it. And at Amazon, actually, they call it a one-way door and a two-way door. One-way door decisions where you have to be perfect. There's no going back. And two-way door, which is, innovation, basically, where you have to really basically course correct as you go along and take that feedback and move it along. So I think failure is a key part of that. I love the idea of I win or I learn.
Yeah.
I think that's a great motto to have. Other questions, please.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. My name is Ignacio. I'm an architect, so I've had experience with your programs all the way back since like Terry White tutorials and stuff. And I was very excited to see when you guys started, for example, when you acquired Substance a few years ago and started getting into 3D modeling. And I've been curious ever since then to see what maybe Adobe's vision for the future is, or your vision for it, if you guys are planning to go perhaps into game design, game texturing, and these sort of things. And that's more or less like the, perhaps the more direct question, but perhaps the underlying question there is that I'm wondering, it's how do you see the future? How do you plan the future? How do you think about your vision for Adobe, and how do you steer this huge ship to where you think it's best, or how do you think even what's best, I guess?
Well, again, I think in many ways you start with, what are we trying to do? And I say changing the world through personalized digital experiences. And so what are the important parts of that, right? I mean, the first is, what is a digital experience, right? To your point, digital experiences may have started with just graphics. Then it's video, then it's AR, then it's VR, then it's 3D, then it's immersive environments. And if you look at it that way, our job is in trying to create those experiences for people. The reality is it's harder the more you have these different dimensions, right? If you're a 3D person, you realize that, which is when you're thinking about creating videos are harder to create than just image editing. 3D, because you need objects and animation and interactivity and how objects work together. But we still look at it and say, if there's going to be great new devices on which you can consume that information, and if there's going to be great new experiences, we want to experiment with creating it. And so there's a pretty simple thing. And so when VR devices come out, we're like, okay, let's go figure out how we can create great content for it. So if you believe you're in the content space, and if you believe that anything that's a digital experience, you want to help people create it, then that sort of drives how you should be thinking about what it is. Now, judgment again there is, how much do you invest? What do you think is the time frame for all of that happening? And in some cases, maybe you say, I'm not necessarily going to lead the market in that. Let's see how the devices evolve. But that's part of the strategic rationale that goes into all of that. But if you ask me, I would say any surface on which people want to create. They want to create on a mobile device. They want to create on the web. They want to create on a desktop. Over time, they want to create on a kiosk, a terminal. We want to be the company that helps them do that. Whatever media type emerges, that's the media type for visual communication, that's digital, we want to play a role in that. We started with PDF, certainly images. A lot of you may not realize, video on the web was actually innovated by Adobe and Flash. Mm-hmm. The first video that actually happened, the first gaming that actually happened, was all part of Adobe creation, Adobe and Macromedia. And so that's the way we tend to think of it. Yeah.
No. I'm Paula. I'm a student from Spain. I'm currently studying entrepreneurship and technology here. And I've been an entrepreneur for the last 2 years. So I know that this journey is like a roller coaster. And I wanted to ask you, leading a big company like Adobe, I guess that it's a big roller coaster with a lot of pressure. So I wanted to ask you how you deal with this pressure and with mental health.
I'm fortunate first in that I love what I do. But, all of you also have to find your support system, right? And it starts for me at home. My wife's a psychologist, so I can talk to her about anything, which helps. But it really is a support system, and you need to get your own support system in different ways. When I first took over as CEO, there were 2 other folks. Brad Smith had just taken over as CEO of Intuit. John Donahoe had just taken over as CEO of eBay, PayPal at that point. Enrique had taken over as CEO of Symantec. And we used to get together once a quarter, and we would commiserate or we would celebrate. And so, you need those other outlets. And the other thing, I know people, when they ask me about work-life balance, the work-life balance for me is, I find different passions. Again, different people do it different way. Some people can completely say, okay, I'm turning off for a while. Mm-hmm. More power to you if that's the way in which you find your balance. I can't do that because it's just who I am as a person. I'm like, I've got to check my mail every day. I've got to remove obstacles every day. But I find other things that I can pursue that, take my mind off the, what happens at work. And so I think, in general, to your point, the concern is that unless people have these other outlets, right, by which they can, whether it's people, whether it's passions, the pressure does build, to your point. And, as a company, we try and also be extremely accommodating of what people want to do, because one size doesn't fit all. Yeah. So I'm sharing with you the ways I find, ways to relieve mine, but it may not be true for everybody else. And so I think as a company, you have to think about, do you have enough flexibility to allow people to do, what's important to them? And as long as you're supportive, you're understanding, and people understand the reverse obligations, which is, how do I then get what I need to get done, then it's a win-win situation. But it is something. I mean, a lot of people when, and I think, unfortunately, the pandemic actually further, the reason I'm talking a little bit more about this, it's actually our family's our giving, we give to mental health, because my wife, is so passionate about it, trying to find ways in which, you can anticipate and then you can address it is something where she's dedicated, many years of her life to it. But I think, unfortunately, the pandemic really dramatically changed and, accelerated sort of this as a burning issue for us.
And I think it continues, actually. A lot of studies show that loneliness has gone up a lot since the pandemic, just mental health challenges.
Yeah.
So your point about support system is really important, and also that one size doesn't fit all. I know one CEO in Portland, Oregon, who loves to chop wood with his big axe over the weekend. He lives in a little ranch, and he says this is what clears his mind, because when he's using this heavy duty equipment, he can't think about his emails or his meeting or whatever it is. So I think each one of us has to find
whether it's travel, whether it's a sport, you have to have other passions, and I do. And that's what, that gives you the energy.
And the perspective as well.
And there may be others who work 7/24, and that's what drives them. And so,
We have about, I'd say, 10 more questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Get through 8 at least, so 1.
All right. I'm Marius. I'm also a German exchange student studying computer science here. And you already touched upon your wife and maybe what role she played in your career. And I want to ask whether you could just elaborate on that and maybe have any stories with her, or just any thoughts that come up regarding her role that she played in your career.
Again, it's a team. Without her, there's no way I would be, anywhere near as successful. I mean, she's my best friend, and it's hard for me even to know how to answer that question at some level, because it is a team, right? And everything that we did, we made conscious decisions together when I did my startup, and then after that, raising our 2 kids. And so, I owe everything that I've done to, her support. So that's the way I would say. But we have shared goals, and we have shared things that we also do together. And I think that's important part, again, going back to that earlier question as well. And that's the way you have to think about it. You have to think about what's important to you. Family is extremely important to me. My kids are extremely important. And so I find the time to do that. Even when I was CEO early in my career, you can find the time to go visit, be at every one of their basketball games or tennis games. And I did that. And the company supports that because you can. And if that was important to me, I did my MBA actually. I did my MBA part-time, as Homa said. In those days, I was working at Apple, so I had a full-time job. My wife was doing her PhD. We just had our first son. And so you learn the value of time and what's important and what's unimportant to you. And so you make trade-offs and you make priorities. Again, if you think you're not, go back to, I'm not a victim. So I've made my choices. If I've made my choices, what are the things that I'm willing to trade off, and what are the things I'm not willing to trade off? And to each one of you, that would be the recommendation I would do. Make that in the way that's important to you, right? There are a whole bunch of things that are unimportant to me that I cut out.
And I think that word trade-off is really, really an important point, because you can't have it all, right? And I think sometimes we think we can have it all.
Right.
So I think to be very thoughtful about that and see what really matters to you and what doesn't matter to you that you can let go. I know we have lots of questions, Vicky, so.
I actually wanted to ask you about the industry you're in. I feel like it's a very fast-paced industry, and as you said, you went through several pivots, and you have to be thinking about what's the next thing all the time, no? What do you think is the most important thing that has kept Adobe at the forefront of innovation all the time? Is it like time to market? Is it the brand, or the people that work there? Like, what do you think is the most important?
If there's one thing, I'd say it's people. No. If there's one thing, it's people. But in a large company, the larger the company gets, you can't take a one-size-fits-all for everything. If you're incubating a new product, I might say, take the time, get the product right with other products. So I think part of it is Part of it is really orienting what is important for success on the different product. You have to be impatient for something in a company. That's what I would say. Sometimes I'm impatient for revenue. Sometimes I'm impatient for profit. Sometimes I'm impatient for the product delivery. So challenge the team in the right way. So I think part of the challenge is in larger companies, if you take the same metric as success for products at different part of their life cycle or at different scale, then you will unnecessarily take the wrong hammer and believe that every problem is the same nail. So that's, I think, a way in which we try and think about it. If there's a brand new product, what are you impatient for? What are you anxious for? Maybe it's product delivery, and that's all you want. Maybe it's usage. That's what you want. So that's one way in which we've tried to customize our approach towards different products, because not all products are in the same cycle as it relates to software. So that's one thing I think of. But more than anything else, it's the people on the product. You've got to empower them to make the right decisions that's important for the product at that time. And we are a product company. If you say at the end of the day, what is Adobe? Yeah. We're a product company. We have got to deliver really great products. So you've got to have a person who owns that product, and they have to be the person who decides what's most important. But you have to be impatient for something. Because if you're impatient, people amaze you with their ingenuity. Part of what I learned as I grew in my career is when I first used to set goals, I would probably set goals that I thought were all attainable. And because I was the engineer, I was like, okay, we can figure this out. People amaze you with their ingenuity. Mm-hmm. And so set aspirational goals that you're not artificially limiting by what you think can be done. And I think that's one of the big secrets that I've learned, which is set a goal, try it out. If it's way too ambitious and you don't accomplish, still celebrate what you were able to accomplish, because you're probably accomplishing a lot more than what you would have if you had tried to be, very prescriptive. So those are a couple of the tips. But the more you get senior in your management roles, you've got to adopt your management style to people. I think people make the mistake that to inspire people, they all need to be like you. That's the biggest mistake you can make. We have to adapt ourselves. Leaders, people talk about the inverted pyramid a lot. You as leaders have to say, what motivates this person? For some it may be, shipping a product. For some it may be recognition. For some it may be PR. And if you can allow them to be fulfilled in what they're doing, then you're likely to be more successful than believing that they're all motivated by the same things that you are. So there are a couple of ways in which you try and change how you manage the company.
I think we had several hands here.
Hey, so my name is Bendik. I'm studying computer science, and I'm from Norway.
How many people here are studying computer science? Just curious. It's amazing that computer science has in so many schools become the number one, curriculum. It's amazing. And I think it's fabulous, because for those who do it and know, because it's so fundamental to whether it's biology, whether it's literature, whether it's...
Well, every business is becoming a software business. So I think from that point of view as well, you can apply it in so many different domains.
Right. Sorry, ask your question.
Please.
Yeah. So given that you have this huge impact, and that also the compensation from earlier, I can imagine that there are a lot of people wanting to be in your role. So
what do you ask for?
So what I wanted to ask was, how did you end up in this role? I think, what made you specifically end up in the role, and what made you stand out?
I can honestly say I didn't aspire to this role early in my career. I was just intellectually curious. I wanted to do it. At some point, yes, I wanted the role. But initially, I was just like, I want to make impact. I wanted to understand more about the business. I got more responsibility. I took more initiative. And at some point, I said, wow, this is a lot of fun. I think what really changed for me is the gratification that you can get from what a team performs. It became less about individual accomplishment for me, and it became more about team accomplishment. And that's when I realized, hopefully I have something where I can motivate people. And so it happened relatively late for me, I would say, a couple years before I took over. I wasn't, as I said, plotting my thing. But different people, maybe people know earlier on in life what they want to be.
I think a lot of the times you don't know it till you see it. And I think you were the product person, then you were the chief operating officer, then you became
CEO.
The CEO. So it wasn't like you sort of leapt up there.
No.
And I think that is also part of that evolution, which I think we have to consider.
But I did create a startup, and when you create a startup, as I said, every business is a $0 billion business. Why do you create a startup? Because you have an idea of what you want to do and you want to build something. I want to build something. I now have the opportunity to build it at scale, right? And build it with a lot more people and a lot more talent. And that's fun.
So we have time probably, Vicky, for two more questions, because I know you want us.
Hey, my name is Sepper. I'm an EEC student. Thanks for coming here. I was gonna ask, so I wanted to get your perspective as like a CEO. How do you overview like all these employees, like hundreds or thousands of employees? Do you directly like work with the people under you only, or do you ever like go on like check on the individual teams and see like if like they're doing what they're supposed to, or like that was like what I was curious about. I wanted some perspective on.
One important thing is whether you manage a company that has, 1 million people or 30,000 or 5,000, you may be only managing 7 people. And your job is then through them, how do you amplify the impact of what you want? My job is not, I always say, people ask about accountability, right? I mean, how do you hold people accountable? I like to say, give people ownership and they will hold themselves more accountable than you will ever hold them accountable. And so in many ways, I mean, if I say this, if the board of directors of a company thinks their job is holding the CEO accountable, they probably, which it is to some degree from corporate governance, they have the wrong person. Because that person, she or he should be holding themselves accountable 10x more, right? Because they live that. So to your question about what do I like to do, I love to spend time with the product teams. But it's not to hold them accountable, it's to learn. As I said, I mean, I sat down with these researchers, we've announced we have a video model, and I'm just fascinated by the stuff that they're doing. I mean, you're like a kid in a candy store in terms of, what's happening. If you go in there saying your job is to manage exactly what they're doing, it actually will take the fun out of it for me, right? Instead, I can go say, wow, tell me what you're working on. Have you thought about this? And so that's the fun part of the job, which is how do you set the goals, right? That is a big part of my job. How do you create the right team? But then you give them ownership. And if you give them ownership, you'll be super blown away by them feeling even more accountable than you can ever hold them accountable. And so, no, it's not my job micromanaging everybody. It is my job channeling things at times. It is my job, helping change. But anybody who believes that in a company this size that you can do it all, you're just fooling yourself.
Thank you so much, first of all, for your time. My name is Jem. I study business and data science at Haas. You mentioned you went to the same high school with Ajay and Satya, the CEOs of the World Bank and Microsoft. Were you guys friends in high school? And did you guys have any synergies, do you think, in your careers? Did you guys help each other?
We're friends now, and we became friends through the career. We were 3 years apart at that point. And so you know each other. I don't know how it is in high schools here, but you always tend to know your seniors. And the people who are, junior to you know you. And so, we knew each other. We've become very close friends, though, because again, talking about the self-help that somebody said, and just being able to, share experiences, it's one of the joys in my life. I make fewer friends, but I try to make deeper friends. And so, no, in school, we weren't, in the same class. We were a few years apart. But in our career, sometime we got to know each other well before, we ran the companies, and we've stayed in touch ever since.
So before I ask you my last question, which is your advice for our colleagues here in the room, I'm going to make a feeble attempt to summarize some of my own key takeaways from our conversation. I know a lot of you are interested in innovation, entrepreneurial careers. So my key takeaway number one is what you said about what are the 3 ingredients, whether you're building a startup or running a big corporation. You mentioned vision, execution, and team. I think those 3, whether you're running 1 million people or you're running your own little startup, still applies. So I think that's really very important food for thought. Number 2, really tune into who you are, because one size does not fit all. You mentioned you love what you do. That's how you can deal with the pressure. So try to figure out, what do you enjoy doing? What do you not enjoy doing? What makes you tick? What doesn't make you tick? What do you get upset about? What are the values that you care about, talking about values? So what are the trade-offs you're willing to make? So I think that self-awareness is a really key part of it. But my last point is where we started, which is all about mindset. You mentioned, you're curious, you love ambiguity. When you were at school, you enjoyed, that ambiguous world. And I think at the end of the day, it boils down to our attitude towards change and uncertainty. Do we see it as an adventure, as an opportunity to learn, to grow, to evolve? Or do we see it as a threat to our existing ways of being? So I've learned a lot from our conversation, but Shantanu, what is your final piece of advice for our colleagues here in the room?
Well, one thing I should also say, I maybe should have started off with, Haas was incredible. Haas was just an incredible experience. I mean, I think doing that, you're all investing in yourself. And, that's it. I loved your class. As you know, I have said that many times.
And also you told me I didn't give you the right grade, which I fully acknowledge. Okay.
I think I got an A-. It's still,
It still irks him.
But I would say invest in yourselves. It really is an incredible time. I mean, when you think about what's happening, and an investment in education is an investment in yourself. I mean, that's, and the second thing is only you know what's right for you. I mean, that's the part. Drown out the other noises of what everybody's telling you should do. And I did that. Maybe, data point of 1, that it worked for me. And so I'm like, but it's such an incredible time. I mean, technology is going to transform this world. Access to capital is there. If you're interested in, social change, the ability to amplify that social change is there. And so, I mean, every time I go to a college campus, and especially when I come to Cal, I'm like, I wish I could go back to school, and I wish I could learn. And so, the eclectic nature and of what you can learn in places like this, it's a gift. And I hope you appreciate that it's a gift and enjoy it. And then, invest in yourselves.
On that note, we'd like to say a very special thanks to
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all. We have a code up, so this is the last time this semester you all will have a code. I get to send the feedback to Homa and Shantanu. I can't imagine a better class for us. We have 2 more assignments left. One, a reflection, and if you're in the 200 level course, a video with someone you might be interested in talking to. Thank you all so much. Wishing you all a happy and healthy rest of the year.